There is an old railroader story about 3 SD45 locomotives in a tunnel, all at run 8, full throttle. The crew member who wrote about it years later on a rail forum did not call it loud. He said there were no words, just the feeling in your chest cavity, the ringing that stayed for hours, and the absolute certainty that whatever just happened to your ears was not supposed to happen. EMD was not selling quiet. They were selling horsepower. They shipped a 20-cylinder locomotive with a turbo that a lot of crews later described as a scream and let the crews figure out the rest. EMD built 1,260 SD45 locomotives between 1965 and 1971. By the 1970s, a lot of railroads began rebuilding, repowering, or trading them away. People who were there do not describe it as noise. They describe pressure. The way the sound did not just hit your ears, but your ribs. The way conversations stopped without anyone deciding to stop talking. You did not cover your ears out of instinct. You froze because your body was busy processing something it was not built to handle. Even years later, that is the part they remember first. Not the train, but the feeling. The SD45 was EMD's answer to a problem that occupied American railroads in the 60s. Trains were getting longer, heavier, and existing locomotives could barely keep up. The competition was not sitting still either. General Electric was rolling out higher power road units like the U25B and the U28B, and EMD felt the pressure. Their solution was brutally simple. Take the proven 645 diesel engine, add 4 cylinders to the standard 16, and you get 3,600 horsepower on one frame. On paper, this made sense, but in practice, it turned out to be a machine you felt before you heard it. The technology behind it is simple. A turbocharger runs on exhaust gases. More cylinders means more exhaust, and more exhaust can drive the turbo harder at full power. On many 16-cylinder EMDs, the turbo produces a whine. On the SD45, many crews described it as a scream. Layer that on top of the deep bass of 20 cylinders firing together, and you get what one railroader later called the best sound of any locomotive, and absolutely brutal on your ears. There are quotes from crews who lived through this, scattered across internet forums where railroaders trade stories. One wrote years later, "Forget whine, forget howl. The correct description is scream. 3 SD45s, one tight tunnel, all at run 8, equals a noise that words lack being able to describe." Another wrote about the physical impact. You feel it inside of you, reverberating in the chest cavity of your body. Hearing protection definitely required. And then there was the engineer who dryly noted that you really should not go into the engine room of an F45 at full power. He absolutely did not recommend that. These weren't comments from people unfamiliar with diesel locomotives. These were people who worked around them for a living, who knew what loud meant, and who had experience with most major EMD and GE road engines. And they were saying this thing felt different. The SD45 wasn't just another step up on the volume scale. Some crews said it felt extreme compared with other road diesels they had worked around. EMD's focus at the time was output and reliability, not comfort. The sound was a byproduct of that focus, not something that received much attention during development. The first production SD45 for Great Northern arrived in 1966. Great Northern called it hustle muscle. The name tells you something about how the locomotive was perceived: raw, aggressive, and built for work. The flared radiators at the rear made it instantly recognizable. Burlington Northern, Southern Pacific, and Santa Fe bought hundreds. In total, 1,260 units were built between 1965 and 1971. For EMD, that was a commercial success. For sales departments, it meant strong order books. For the crews running them day after day, the experience was more complicated. The 20-cylinder engine soon developed serious reliability issues. Reports and railroad maintenance discussions often point to structural and support problems in the long engine block, along with bearing wear under sustained heavy loads. Some railroads reported units failing in service and needing shop attention. Locomotives were taken out of rotation and returned for repairs, disrupting schedules and frustrating operating departments. EMD introduced reinforcements and revisions over time, but the reputation stuck. In the railroad industry, word travels fast when engines develop recurring problems. What ultimately worked against the SD45 was economics. The extra 600 horsepower came with 4 additional cylinders worth of maintenance, increased fuel consumption, and more parts that could fail. At low speeds, traction often became the limiting factor, which meant the extra horsepower was not always usable. The rails and the physics imposed their own limits. At higher speeds, many railroads found that the SD40 family performed adequately, while being simpler and cheaper to operate. Why pay for the scream if it doesn't move more freight? The market answered quickly. The SD45-2 was introduced in 1972 and sold 136 units in total. The SD40-2, by comparison, sold over 4,000. That wasn't a close contest. It was a clear verdict. What happened to the existing fleet reflected that shift. Southern Pacific rebuilt large numbers of SD45 locomotives into SD45R units with 16-cylinder engines. Santa Fe carried out similar rebuilds. Wisconsin Central acquired many second-hand SD45 locomotives in the 1990s, ran them hard for years, and following the CN takeover, the fleet was eventually retired. Montana Rail Link was among the last operators to keep original 20-cylinder SD45 locomotives in service, with some units lasting into the early 2020s. And yet, that scream. Because even stripped of context, even decades later, the sound still does the same thing. It turns heads. It pulls people closer instead of pushing them away. You see it in the way crowds react when an SD45 opens up. Not applause, not cheering, but silence. People stop moving. They look at each other. They grin. Their bodies are reacting before their brains catch up. There are still places today where you can hear and feel an SD45 with a 20-cylinder engine. The Lake Superior Railroad Museum in Duluth maintains GN400, the original hustle muscle, in operational condition. The locomotive received a replacement 20-cylinder engine in 2019, allowing it to continue running. Whatever the business reasoning behind that decision, it kept the sound alive. The Illinois Railway Museum also operates SD45WC7525 for special events, giving modern audiences a chance to experience the locomotive under power. If people still talk about the SD45, it is not because of spreadsheets or specifications. It is because of the physical memory it left behind. You could ignore the numbers. You could forget the diagrams. But standing near multiple SD45s at full power was an experience that stayed with people. Some sounds do not fade quietly. The SD45 did not disappear overnight, and it was not a failure in the dramatic sense. It faded because the cost and complexity were not worth the extra horsepower. That is not tragedy. That is economics. Railroads do not buy machines because they sound impressive or look intimidating. They buy machines that make money. And by that measure, the screamer lost. But in Duluth, Great Northern 400 still runs and still screams. If you have never stood next to a 20-cylinder EMD at full throttle, now you know where to go. And if you have, you already know why people still talk about it.